This is VOA News. I'm Joe Ramsey. The flood levels from the destruction of a dam in southern Ukraine is causing devastation across large parts of the region, now with residents facing fresh heartbreak in what is still an active war zone. Reuters correspondent Matthew Laratunda reports.
Ukraine's government says the destruction of the dam, which it blames on Russia, is threatening to leave hundreds of thousands of residents without access to drinking water. It also says it will turn what was once farmland into swamps and turn other areas into desert. Russia blames Ukraine for the disaster and has imposed a state of emergency in the areas that it controls, such as Novokakhovka, where the destroyed dam is.
Reuters correspondent Matthew Laratunda. Ukraine's foreign minister Dmytro Kuleba said on Wednesday talks about resolving the conflict between his country and Russia could not start with a mere cessation of hostilities.
Because those who think that the urgent task is to freeze the conflict and then to see how to fix it afterwards, they are wrong. They don't understand the logic of this war.
He held an online briefing aimed at African journalists following his tour of African countries last month. Kuleba said multiple negotiations and consultations at a ceasefire since Russia's annexation of Crimea from Ukraine in 2014 have only led to the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Pope Francis underwent a 3-hour surgery in a Rome hospital on Wednesday to repair a hernia most likely caused by scars from an operation in 2021, and the Vatican said the procedure had no complications. This is VOA News. One of Pakistan's largest charities is seeing a rise in daily demand for its free food, but a drop in donations, with an annual inflation rate of almost 38% eating through people's incomes. VOA's Pakistan Bureau Chief Sarah Zaman has a story.
Every day, thousands of Pakistanis come to one of the Salani Welfare Trust's free food distribution centers spread across the country for a hot meal. Charitable giving is a big part of Pakistani culture. In a Gallup Pakistan 2021 survey, nearly 76% of the respondents said that they had given money to help someone in the year before. At the same time, the proportion of Pakistanis who pay taxes has always remained dismally low. The country's tax to GDP ratio is below 10%. What most countries need to sustain economic growth, according to experts, is a tax to GDP ratio of at least 15%. Sarah Zaman, VOA News, Islamabad.
Former U.S. Vice President Mike Pence has opened his 2024 Republican nomination bid by firmly denouncing his ex-running mate. AP Washington correspondent Sagar Magani reports.
Pence is the first vice president in modern history to challenge the president under whom he served.
Well, hello, Iowa!
And kicking off his campaign in a Des Moines suburb, accused Donald Trump of abandoning conservative principles and dereliction of duty during the Capitol riot.
Endangered my family.
And said Trump demanded Pence choose between him and the Constitution.
Now voters will be faced with the same choice.
The GOP field is now largely set and large, including Trump, Ron DeSantis, and more than a half dozen others. Sagar Magani at the White House.
One of the world's top golfers is speaking out about the historic partnership between the PGA Tour and Live Golf. Correspondent Gethin Kulba reports.
Rory McIlroy, the strongest voice against Saudi-funded Live Golf that caused so much disruption in golf, said Wednesday he now feels like a sacrificial lamb with the stunning reversal of the PGA Tour becoming partners with Saudi Arabia's enormous wealth fund.
If you're thinking about one of the biggest sovereign wealth funds in the world, would you rather have them as a partner or an enemy? At the end of the day, money talks, and you'd rather have them as a partner.
It was McIlroy who helped lead a players-only meeting last August that reshaped the PGA Tour to fend off the challenge of Live Golf. The world number 3 is set to defend his back-to-back titles this week at the RBC Canadian Open. I'm Gethin Kulba.
Smoke from Canadian wildfires is pouring into the U.S. East Coast and Midwest and covering the capitals of both nations in an unhealthy haze. I'm Joe Ramsey, VOA News.
This is VOA News. In Washington, I'm Jeff Custer. The World Health Organization said Thursday was rushing in supplies and upping surveillance after Ukraine's dam disaster amid an increased threat of cholera and other waterborne diseases. Ukraine and Russia have accused each other over the breach of the Kakhovka Dam in southern Ukraine Tuesday, which sparked massive flooding and forced thousands to flee their homes, sparking fears of a humanitarian disaster. At a news briefing at agency headquarters in Geneva Thursday, the WHO warned the broader impact on the health could also be dramatic. WHO Emergency Response Officer Teresa Zakaria told reporters so far no cases of cholera in Ukraine have been reported, but the flooding has raised heightened surveillance for waterborne diseases and other dangers.
We are trying to address quite a wide range of health risk actually associated with the floods, starting from trauma to drowning to waterborne diseases, but also all the way to the potential implications of disruption to chronic treatment, which we're watching out also very closely.
Following talks Thursday at the White House, U.S. President Joe Biden and British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak held a news conference where, with Russia's invasion of Ukraine at the top of their agenda, both pledged to support Ukraine as long as it takes. In his comments, President Biden credited British leader for his leadership in supporting Ukraine.
The UK and the United States, together with more than 50 partners, have committed historic levels of security assistance to Ukraine. And I want to thank the Prime Minister for his strong leadership, contributing significant amounts of security assistance and training Ukrainian troops so they can effectively use the equipment and ammunition we've collectively provided them.
Sunak said it was important for allies to put up a united front to send a message to Russia. This is VOA News. The number of U.S. residents filing for new claims for unemployment benefits surged last week to a 2-year high, suggesting the labor market was slowing amid mounting risks of recession. Reuters correspondent Lisa Bernhard has more.
Data from the Labor Department on Thursday showed that 261,000 new claims were filed for the week ended June 3rd, an increase of 28,000 from the prior week. That's more than economists polled by Reuters had expected. For some economists, it's another sign of cracks forming in the labor market as the economy feels the full impact of the Federal Reserve's rate hiking cycle, its most aggressive in decades. Many believed layoffs were spreading from interest rate-sensitive sectors such as technology and finance to other segments of the economy. But the labor market is only slowing gradually. The unemployment rate, while rising to a 7-month high of 3.7% in April, remains low by historical standards.
That's Reuters correspondent Lisa Bernhard reporting. In a surprise decision, the U.S. Supreme Court has rejected a GOP-led effort to weaken the landmark Voting Rights Act. AP correspondent Sagar Magani reports.
The High Court has affirmed a lower court ruling that found Alabama likely violated the act with its congressional map. In a state where more than 1 in 4 residents is black, the map has just 1 majority black seat out of 7 congressional districts. Alabama and Louisiana will now have to redraw the maps to boost black representation. It's a surprise because the Supreme Court allowed Alabama to use the challenged map in last year's elections. In October's oral arguments, the justices appeared willing to make it harder to challenge redistricting plans as racially discriminatory under the Voting Rights Act. 2 conservatives joined the court's liberals in the 5-4 ruling. Sagar Magani, Washington.
The U.S. Defense Department says is disputing reports that China and Cuba have reached a secret pact, allowing Beijing to build an electronic eavesdropping facility on the island 160 kilometers from the United States. The reports, which first appeared in the Wall Street Journal, citing unnamed intelligence officials, said China agreed to pay the financially strapped island several $1 billion for the facility. Speaking to reporters Thursday, Pentagon spokesman Air Force General Pat Ryder said that was not accurate.
I can tell you based on the information that we have that is not accurate, that we are not aware of China and Cuba developing any type of spy station. Separately, I would say that the relationship that those 2 countries share is something that we continuously monitor.
In Washington, I'm Jeff Custer. This is VOA News. This is VOA News. In Washington, I'm Jeff Custer. A 49-page federal criminal indictment unsealed Friday charges former President Donald Trump with serious crimes. VOA's chief national correspondent Steve Herman in Washington reports.
The indictment, which includes photographs, says Donald Trump stored highly secret documents, which he took from the White House to his Florida resort when he left office, and stored them in such places as a bathroom and a shower, his bedroom, and the gilded ballroom of the Mar-a-Lago property. He allegedly twice showed some of the classified materials to others. Trump is also charged with trying to obstruct the federal investigation into his retention of the files. Special counsel Jack Smith says the indictment was voted by a grand jury of citizens in Florida.
Our laws that protect national defense information are critical to the safety and security of the United States, and they must be enforced. We have one set of laws in this country, and they apply to everyone.
Steve Herman, VOA News, Washington.
Associated Press U.S. law enforcement editor Mike Balsamo read through the Trump indictment as it was released and said, while the former president insists he's done nothing wrong, prosecutors have provided a lot of detail.
This indictment spells out measures that the former president took, along with a co-conspirator who is charged in this indictment, Walt Nauta, Trump aide who worked at Mar-a-Lago. And basically what prosecutors say here is that Trump directed Nauta at some point to move boxes of records that were held in Mar-a-Lago. The indictment spells out specifically one instance, a conversation between Trump and his lawyers, in which they're discussing receiving a subpoena from the Department of Justice. And Trump says to one of his lawyers that he doesn't want them going through the boxes. He doesn't want the Department of Justice to go through the boxes. And wouldn't it be better if they just said they didn't have any records?
This is VOA News. French President Emmanuel Macron met Friday with public safety authorities and emergency personnel who responded to the knife attack in the alpine town of Annecy that left 4 children and 2 adults wounded at a playground. Reuters correspondent Rachel Faber has more.
Macron, who has called the attack an act of absolute cowardice, visited the hospital in nearby Grenoble where 3 of the 4 children are being treated. The 2 children who had been most seriously injured were in stable condition on Friday, and doctors are optimistic for their recovery, said the president. Annecy's cathedral held a mass on Friday night in tribute to the victims. In attendance at both events was Henri, a Catholic pilgrim who has been dubbed the backpack hero. The 24-year-old came face-to-face with the assailant. In videos posted on social media, he can be seen using his backpack as a shield to try to block the attack. Police have arrested the suspected attacker, a homeless 31-year-old Syrian national. Authorities say there is no indication that terrorism was the motivation for the attack.
That's Reuters correspondent Rachel Faber reporting. Former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson abruptly quit as a member of Parliament Friday in a furious protest against lawmakers investigating his conduct. Reuters correspondent Angela Johnston reports.
Former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is quitting as a member of Parliament immediately. In a statement on Friday, he said, "I am being forced out by a tiny handful of people." Johnson had been fighting for his political life. His premiership had been cut short last year, partly by anger within his own party and across the country over COVID rule-breaking lockdown parties in his Downing Street office and home. A parliamentary inquiry was investigating whether he misled the House of Commons when he said all COVID-19 rules were followed. If it found Johnson misled Parliament recklessly or deliberately, it could turf him from Parliament for more than 10 days.
That's Reuters correspondent Angela Johnston reporting. Canadian wildfires are easing from earlier this week. AP correspondent Jackie Quinn reports.
It was a week of misery for many who live in the smoke-filled Northeast, especially those with breathing problems. But shifting winds are helping the smoke blow out to sea in the mid-Atlantic, says the EPA's Director of Air Quality Assessment, Chet Wayland.
The good news is it's starting to clear up in some of the northern parts of the country. And hopefully in a few days, it'll clear out down here in the mid-Atlantic areas as well.
He suggests that people use their app and website airnow.gov, which pinpoints the air in your neighborhood based on zip code.
You can actually take actions to protect your health in real time.
He says people should review the color coding and the number of pollution particles per cubic meter.
In Washington, I'm Jeff Custer. This is VOA News.